Volcano, Chapter 4, Links and More Links. Here and there in the gray wilderness a hardy plant grew, perhaps fireweed or lupine. It seemed to be the only living thing around, but it wasn't. Beneath its leaves were ants, ladybugs, aphids, grasshoppers, beetles, spiders, and other small animals. The plant was an island of life, an island of survivors and colonizers. Each kind of life made some other kind possible. The aphids, for example, sucked sap from the plant. Ants fed on the sweet honeydew that aphids live off of. Ladybugs ate aphids. Spiders trapped and ate insects and also other spiders. Some meadows and areas of clear-cut forest had groups of plant survivors. With them were animal survivors. White-footed deer mice and pocket gophers. Insects and spiders had arrived as colonizers. The mice ate seeds and insects. The gophers ate roots and bulbs, but they also did something that helped the plants. Gophers spend much of their time tunneling. They dig tunnels as they search for food underground. They dig under tunnels to live in. When digging, a gopher spreads its hind feet wide apart. It digs with its front feet and claws, sending the loosened dirt back under its body. The dirt piles up behind it. From time to time, the gopher turns around and pushes the dirt back along the tunnel. At the mouth of the tunnel, it gives a big shove and flings the dirt out onto the surface. These habits make the gopher a pest in a garden. The gopher eats bulbs and roots of plants that people want. It throws out piles of dirt on the lawn. But to natural scientists at Mount St. Helens, the pocket gopher was a small hero. The gophers were tunneling in soil that was now covered with ash and pumice. By shoving soil out of their tunnels, they brought it to the surface. The piles of soil became places where seeds could put down roots and plants could grow. The soil itself held some seeds, and it held the spores of certain fungi. These are fungi that grow into the roots of plants. Together, the fungi and the roots form a partnership. The fungi takes water and minerals from the soil and pass them to the roots. They do this job much better than roots alone can. In turn, the fungi, which cannot make their own food, take sugars from the plant. The gophers brought the soil and the fungus spores to the surface, the plants that grew in the soil. When the plants grew well, their roots served as food for the gophers. Above ground, the plants became islands of life, places where many small animals could live. The seeds of these plants spread and started still more islands of life. Some ants found food in islands of life. Other ants had survived in places where there were no islands. They may have had some food stored underground, but to go on surviving, they needed to find food above ground. For many ants, that food turned out to be fire fungi. The fungi formed huge mats of tangled threads. Some of the mats lasted only a short time. Others grew in places where there was water and also food, bits of wood or other dead matter. These mats lasted for months. They were the only food that was crawling over the pumice and ash could find. When ants from different colonies met at mats, scientists saw them fight one another for the food. The fungus mats also served as seed beds for other plants. By the summer of 1981, the fire fungi were gone and mosses were growing in their place. The mosses, in turn, trapped seeds in their rough surfaces. The seeds sprouted and grew into green plants. Green plants are living things that make their own food, so nearly all other forms of life depend on green plants. Some take food from the plants. Others eat the eaters of plants. In making their food, green plants take minerals from the soil. In nature, the minerals never get used up because they are recycled. They go back in the soil after animals or plants or parts of plants die. Some of the minerals may be washed out of the dead material by rain or melting snow. Most are released as the dead material by raining or melting snow. Most are released as the dead material rots or decays. Decay is caused by many forms of life, such as bacteria, fungi, mites, springtails, beetles, millipedes. Some feed on dead material. Some eat bacteria and fungi, but must eat the dead material to get them. Either way, the dead material is broken down and minerals go back in the soil. On the north side of Mount St. Helens, these small forms of life broke down the remains of animals and plants killed in the eruption. They broke down the droppings of animals. They broke down leaves and stems. When plants died back in autumn, minerals were released and used in new plant growth. Even the bodies of insects help plants grow. Many adult insects have short lives of only days or weeks. Also, as insects grow, they shed their hard outside covering. They molt. On the surface of ash and pumice, scientists could see the molts of dead bodies of insects. They could collect and measure them. They were surprised at the amount of carbon and other minerals in the molten bodies. They realized that insect bodies have always enriched the soil, but as one scientist said, we never even noticed them before because they're so small. Insects and other small animals were food for the first birds that returned. Natural scientists think that all the birds on the north side of Mount St. Helens were killed on the morning of May 18. Later, that summer, there were many bird visitors, but at first only a few kinds of birds could live and breed in the area. Juncos, because they eat insects and make their nest in hollows in the ground. Woodpeckers also found food, and some found dead or broken off trees in which they could make nest holes. Once woodpeckers have raised their young, they desert the nest holes. Deserted woodpecker holes helped mountain bluebirds to return. Bluebirds also nest in holes, but they cannot make their own. They must find holes that have formed naturally or have been made by other animals. Insects are also food for many kinds of fish. Most of these insects spend much of their lives in water. When they hatch from eggs, they do not look like their parents. They go through several stages before they turn into adults. Some, such as mayflies and caddis flies, spend most of their lives going through these stages. The adults live only long enough to mate and lay eggs. Both fish and water insects need oxygen. In many lakes, there was little oxygen during the first few years after the eruption. They were filled with trees and bits of plants. Billions upon billions of bacteria and other tiny living things were in the lakes, feeding on these materials and on one another, and using up the oxygen. Surviving fish had to live near the surface where the winds stirred the water and added oxygen to it. They did not find much to eat. That first summer, there were two main insect foods for fish. One was the rat-tailed maggot, a young form of horsefly. The tail of this maggot is like a straw, and it serves as a breathing tube. In water, the little oxygen, the maggot puts up its rat tail and takes oxygen from the air. The second food was the young of mosquitoes, which also have breathing tubes. The May 18 eruption wiped out most large forms of life on the north side of Mount St. Helens. The healing of the slope started with many small forms: bacteria, fungi, hardy weeds and seeds, insects, spiders, pocket gophers. Linked together, they formed a base that made possible the return of other kinds of life. By the end of the first summer, some of the survivors had died, but others were still alive and well. Colonizers had been arriving steadily. Looking up in autumn, scientists saw the air was silver with seeds and insects blowing in the wind. Life was coming back to the volcano as it had many times before.